Hi, people. It's 7:30 a.m., the 6th of August, 2022. I've just watched the film Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe, Tony Curtis, and Jack Lemmon. Comedy film. If you haven't seen it, it's quite good. Perhaps a little bit dated, but it's a watchable film. Um, Also, this week marks the 60th anniversary of Marilyn Monroe's death. 60 years exactly since she was infamously found dead in her Brentwood, Los Angeles home at the age of 36, which is the same age as me now. It was the same age that Princess Diana was when she died. And Elton John, of course, made his song Candle in the Wind to both those very famous women. I'll be referencing a lot of famous people in this video because this is kind of what the video is about. Um, and I don't want people to infer that I'm homing in on one particular person necessarily. It's just the subject of fame is very much on my mind this morning. And specifically one aspect of it, which is fan worship. Um, what I want to discuss, look at, this is something I've covered before. I'm sure I've made another video about this, but it's an important thing because it's a curious phenomenon. I might have even made this one quite recently, so I apologize if this is repetitive. What I might do is look at which video is better and just go with it and delete the other one. Better in terms of the content, viewership, and so on. What I want to discuss is this idea of you get a person who is so famous and so admired, um, and they kind of are put into this position of idolatry, for want of a better term. Um, and I'm sure I made this video recently, actually come to think about it. What do we mean by celebrity? Well, you get famous people who are famous by virtue of their office. For example, it could be a political role. Um, Thereby, they become famous because they are a president or a prime minister or a governor, um, or perhaps a senior politician, not quite a head of government, but senior level. In this country, for example, leader of the opposition, foreign secretary, home secretary, chancellor, the great offices of state, and perhaps a few other politicians are going to be in the public mind simply because they are high profile, alongside, of course, the prime minister. Right now, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are getting a lot of attention for obvious reasons because they both want to be the next prime minister. Um, but thinking in different ways, celebrity probably is not so much politicians, it's more or business people. It's more musicians, actors, sports people. That tends to be the domain of celebrity. There are some outliers, of course. In the 21st century, we've seen a number of business people who are also celebrities. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates. They're all very successful business people, incredibly wealthy business people, like astonishingly wealthy. Um, and they're also celebrities. Elon Musk is one of the most famous people in the world. He was Person of the Year last year on Time magazine. He's astronomically wealthy, so is Jeff Bezos. To the point where they make mere millionaires look like paupers. Um, but one phenomenon I've noticed is you get a small handful of people. I mentioned Marilyn Monroe earlier. She's certainly one of them. Elvis Presley. Um, Both Elvis and Marilyn this year are once again kind of in the public mind. There's going to be a new Netflix biopic about Marilyn Monroe starring Anna de Armas. And of course, there was the Baz Luhrmann biopic of Elvis. Great film, by the way. I watched it. I was very impressed. I thought Austin Butler done a great job. Tom Hanks played Colonel Parker. I didn't do a review of that at the time. I should have done, but it was a very good movie. Baz Luhrmann rarely disappoints. I thought it was superb. Um, and I'm an Elvis fan. I like Elvis Presley's music, and I'm very interested in the man. I always have been. Um, but Elvis had his flaws, and So does every person I'm going to talk about in this video. Another figure I'm very interested in is Muhammad Ali, the boxer. Doesn't really need an introduction because he's a rare example of a successful boxer who transcends the sport. And there's only a small handful of others. Manny Pacquiao, definitely. Um, the reason Pacquiao transcends the sport is he's almost certainly the most famous Filipino in the world. And he's been successful in politics now. He didn't become president this year. He was one of those running for president. He got the third most votes, um, but he didn't win. I think there's different reasons for that. He's still quite young in political terms. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has become president controversially. Um, but Pacquiao has transcended the sport because he's a massive celebrity in the Philippines and he's widely admired in the Philippines. Um, but even Pacquiao hasn't been without scandal. During his boxing career, he was got into a little bit of hot water with the perception that he was around women, and this was contradictory to his Christian values, and just there were some things going on around that. But he is still widely admired in the Philippines and around the world. Muhammad Ali, of course, no question about it. Tyson Fury, I'll get back to Ali in a second. Tyson Fury is arguably transcending the sport. I'm not suggesting he's on Ali's level, but he is possibly the most colourful boxer since Muhammad Ali. I think even beyond Mike Tyson, his namesake. Tyson was controversial, but not necessarily colourful in the same way. Um, he was controversial and very famous, but arguably for all the wrong reasons. Tyson Fury's had a share of controversy, but he's also a larger than life character. So he has that kind of Ali charisma. But there was only one Muhammad Ali. Now, I want to talk a bit about Muhammad Ali. I have mentioned this before, but I think this is a very good example of what I'm talking about. If you go to any boxing forum, if you follow the sport and you go to any boxing forum, or it doesn't even need to be a boxing forum, it could be a news report about Ali, it could be a quotation by Ali, it could be any reference to Muhammad Ali, pretty much. Now, if you stray from the sort of consensus in any way, shape, or form, you're almost immediately pounced on. And it goes something like this. If you point out that Muhammad Ali believed in segregation, if you point out that he was against miscegenation, he was opposed to mixed race couples vocally. He always said people should stick with their own. Ali was a huge race baiter. The bounce back is usually along these lines. Oh, but you need to understand the time. It was the 1960s. Black men were being discriminated against. Ali was a great um, advocate for the black man. But here's the thing: Muhammad Ali himself came from a relatively comfortable background compared to many other African Americans. There's a lot of contradictions about Muhammad Ali. His so-called slave name, Cassius Clay, was actually he was named after a famous 19th century abolitionist. He was named by his black parents. Um, he believed in segregation. He often vocalized this, and this wasn't kind of the naive ponderings of a guy who was a teenager. This is Ali in his mid 30s. He was in the Nation of Islam for years. The Nation of Islam was a fringe organization that I understand the Southern Poverty Law Center designated a hate group. Um, People seem to conveniently forget this about Ali. Now, he'd done a lot of good stuff in his life. He did push hard for peace. He done enormous charity work. He'd done a lot of good things. He did. But people also conveniently forget he popularized trash talking. The way he treated Joe Frazier was a disgrace. He said things about Joe Frazier which were incredibly inflammatory. For what? Just to hype a fight. So there's some things about Muhammad Ali I didn't care much for. in terms of his politics, in terms of some of his approach. Um, George Foreman's kind of defended him. He said it was never in spite, it was only to sell fights. Maybe that's true, but I think he went too far sometimes. Foreman himself went into a very dark place after the Rumble in the Jungle. George Foreman, has to be said, he's a remarkable character because not only did he rebound and become the oldest heavyweight champion in the world, sort of an interesting thing because at the time Muhammad Ali was the youngest when he beat Sonny Liston in their first fight. It was later surpassed by by Mike Tyson, but Foreman is a devout Christian, so I think that gets into Christian forgiveness. And he's full of nothing but praise for Ali now. But after the Rumble in the Jungle, he went into a very dark depression. That's the reality. All I would say is when it comes to the Muhammad Ali thing, people need to be honest. Um, the truth of the matter is, Muhammad Ali had more in common with the Ku Klux Klan. I'm talking about politics here, not personality, politics, in terms of their pro segregation views, than he did with Martin Luther King. That's the reality. And the thing is, if you tell the truth about these icons, people go crazy. They think you can't say that. How dare you? Who are you to question the greatest? And that's what it goes like. It kind of gets into these personalized attacks. Like if you if you question an iconic figure, then it gets into who are you? Who are you? As if I suddenly lose free speech. John Lennon's another example. John Lennon pontificated about respect for women when he was a very sloppy husband. He was great singer, but the man was a hypocrite. There's other examples. Um, Elvis, again, I'm an Elvis fan, but he gave he was furious with Priscilla for having an affair with their karate instructor. I believe his name was Mike Stone. Yeah, Elvis was going around the country womanizing. He was a famous womanizer, so it's a bit hypocritical. To give Priscilla a hard time for that when he was basically doing the same thing, but on a much bigger scale. Um, Michael Jackson, you know. Um, I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of his legal trouble because I don't know, right? I just don't know. I watched that famous documentary. I think it was called, it was the one about Neverland. I've very mixed feelings about it. So I'm not going to make a conclusion on that. I just don't know. I just don't know. But I will say this, Michael Jackson fans are a good example. I'm talking about the hardcore fans here. I'm not talking about average fans. They're a good example of the dangers of super fandom because they would, you know, almost kill someone who digressed. I mean, when Jarvis Cocker of Pulp famously mooned Michael Jackson during his history tour. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it was a very crass thing to do. It was unprofessional, but Cocker explained that he didn't like the way Jackson was going around basically playing God and having these massive statues of himself. Maybe he had a point. It was a little bit of it was certainly vain of Michael Jackson to do that. Anyway, that's why he done the stunt. Maybe he shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have disrespected the fellow artist in that way during his performance at the BAFTAs. But the backlash was just, I mean, Jarvis Cocker was vilified, really vilified by Michael Jackson fans during the trial. You know, anyone who spoke out against Michael Jackson was vilified. Now, why this makes me uncomfortable is I think of the Jimmy Savile thing. The fact of the matter is, for years in this country, Jimmy Savile was adulated and propped up. And yet we know what we know now, that he was one of this country's worst predators. I'm not for a second saying that it's the same thing. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that shows the danger of idolatry, of worshipping people. Because a public figure can very well have another side. Mother Teresa's another example. Her practices were very controversial. Well, today they're very controversial. At the time, she was widely hailed as a great humanitarian. But her attitude was God's will was that the sick die naturally rather than giving them efficient medical treatment. And her hospitals were definitely Sisters of Mercy Charity, I believe that's what it was called. Certainly warranted a lot of scrutiny, but you get devout Christians who will really attack anyone who questions her. So I'm sure there's other examples. Well, the Mike Tyson one is particularly problematic because the man is a convicted rapist. Now, people could say it was a miscarriage of justice, but in the eyes of the law, he was convicted. And even if you disregard that, even if you say, well, he was framed, he was innocent, there's a lot of other things about Mike Tyson that really, really is not honourable or respectable in any way, shape, or form. He was incredibly talented. He became the world's youngest heavyweight champion. But I tire of this kind of worship around Mike Tyson. Like people act like he's a prophet or he's a philosopher or something. No, he's not. He really isn't. He's a very, very talented sportsman who had a very troubled private life. That's the reality of it. I mean, Mike Tyson himself would agree with that. He's one of his own biggest critics. Um, what I'm driving at here is I'm not trying to tear anyone down. I'm not trying to be a wet blanket. I think it's good to have people to look up to admire. Um, although would certainly, like I say, question some of the choices. But I think it's good to have aspiration and look up to people as long as it's kind of at a healthy level. What makes me uncomfortable is when public figures are adulated to the point where their fans are not thinking critically. They're not thinking critically. And they vilify and attack anyone who digresses. It's I think very unhealthy. I mean, if the celebrity you're worshipping is so great, then they shouldn't need to be, you shouldn't need to tear down critics, vilify critics. Because I mean the Jimmy Savile thing shows that people say, oh, why did the girls come forward later? The fact of the matter is they tried. They did report these things, but they were told, no, you can't question Jimmy Savile. Basically shut up. And I don't want people to jump to conclusions. I'm aware that mentioning Marilyn Monroe and Jimmy Savile in the same video, people are going to say, oh, you're comparing them. No, I'm not. I'm really, really not. I'm just driving at the general picture, which is celebrity worship is not healthy. Even revered political figures, the Kennedys certainly had their flaws. Martin Luther King had his flaws. These iconic figures that people adulate and worship. Um, I mean, in dictatorships, it is kind of a tool of the dictatorship personality cults. You got it in Mao's China, actually, to some degree, in Xi Jinping's China, certainly under Putinism. Um, but in those cases, is kind of how the state operates. With celebrities, it's not the state, but it's still power. And I just think people need to be more objective. By all means, you can admire someone, you can respect someone, but nobody should be deluded that the celebrity they're worshipping is perfect. And just because someone is pointing out some facts or even saying they don't like that person shouldn't mean that they shout it down. It just makes me very uncomfortable. And I'm an ambitious person. Um, I admire public figures, but celebrity worship, no. Final point, another recent example of this, the Depp Heard trial. Now, I believe the right outcome was reached. I believe that Amber Heard's testimony just didn't add up. I think Johnny Depp's testimony was stronger. But I think the jury were objective. And I think that most of the people watching that were objective. But there were some super fans who were just going out of their way to vilify Amber Heard. And I think there was a bit of that going on. Like, oh, how dare Johnny be questioned? Johnny Depp's definitely not without flaws. I think even his own lawyer admitted that some of the text messages were certainly not what she would have. Camille Vasquez, who's sort of become a celebrity in her own right now. She said that text was not something she would send, and it was kind of dismissed as a Monty Python reference. I don't really, I mean, I don't think that's, I wouldn't respect that myself. Um, but yeah, I do think some Johnny Depp fans were being a bit hysterical in the way they were looking at the case. Like they were absolutely vilifying Amber Heard and absolutely adulating Johnny Depp. One woman came from Los Angeles and she said, "I'm here because I know Johnny." And I'm thinking, well, do you really know Johnny Depp? You were photographed with him once. Do you really, really know the man? My gut feeling is he was telling the truth. My gut feeling is he's probably a decent person. That's my gut feeling, but I don't like that sort of adulation to the point where, you know, this idea Johnny Depp's an angel and Amber Heard's the devil. It's it's a nonsense, really is. Let me know your thoughts.